Charlotte-Aglaé d'Orléans was born on October 22, 1700 at the Palais Royal in Paris. She was the fourth daughter of Philippe II d'Orléans and Françoise-Marie de Bourbon, who was the legitimate daughter of Louis XIV, born from his relationship to Madame de Montespan. Charlotte's baptism did not take place until July 3, 1710, shortly before the wedding of her eldest sister, Louise Elisabeth, to Charles, Duke of Berry. At court, Charlotte was known and addressed as Mademoiselle de Valois. As a child, Charlotte was energetic and fun. Her father was very fond of her, and he spoiled her whenever he had the chance. Shortly after the marriage of her sister, the 9-year-old Charlotte and her 2-year-old sister Louise Adélaïde were sent to the Abbey of Chelles for further education. Charlotte's grandmother, Elisabeth of the Palatinate, had offered to take the two girls, who did not want to be sent to a convent, to live with her at the Château de Saint-Cloud, but Charlotte's mother declined the offer. Françoise-Marie de Bourbon secretly hoped that her two daughters would remain at Chelles to enter religious life. Louise Adélaïde did, and eventually she became Abbess of Chelles. Charlotte-Aglaé remained at Chelles Abbey until August 1714. Evil tongues claimed that Charlotte was recalled to court because she was to be married off, but this was not the case. However, her sister, the Duchess of Berry, had effectively tried to arrange a marriage for Charlotte to Louis Armand II, Prince of Conti, a year earlier, but this match had been refused by the king. Upon her return to court, Charlotte moved into the Palais Royal, accompanying her parents on various official occasions. Charlotte wasn't considered to be a great beauty. Her grandmother wrote in one of her letters, "When she was still a child, I thought she would become quite beautiful, but I am very much disappointed in my hopes." Charlotte's mother, who throughout her life showed no interest in her daughters, tried to interest her in a marriage to her cousin, Louis-Auguste, Prince de Dombes, but she was unsuccessful. As a consequence, Françoise-Marie de Bourbon sent her stubborn daughter to live with her grandmother at Saint-Cloud. As soon as Charlotte moved in with her grandmother, Elisabeth of the Palatinate grew even less fond of her granddaughter, often calling her a liar and predicting she'd cause the family much trouble. But with many of her contemporaries, Charlotte was quite popular and appreciated as a kind person. Nevertheless, her grandmother's prediction became true when Charlotte started an affair with Louis-François Armand du Plessis, Duc de Richelieu. When the Duke was imprisoned in the Bastille on March 29, 1719, as a conspirator in the Cellamare conspiracy, Charlotte secretly visited him there and tried to persuade her father to release him. Charlotte's grandmother did not know about the affair for quite a while, but when she learned how much her granddaughter had compromised the family by her behavior, she angrily sent Charlotte back to her mother in Paris, who did not want her daughter to live with her either. Charlotte's father, Philippe II d'Orléans, was well aware that he had to do something about his daughter's improper behavior, as it might interfere with the marriage negotiations for her younger sister Louise Elisabeth to Louis, the Crown Prince of Spain. He therefore decided Charlotte had to be married off as soon as possible. Several marriage negotiations for Charlotte, to among other Charles de Bourbon, Count of Charolais, and Charles-Emmanuel III, the later King of Sardinia, came to nothing. The marriage to Charles-Emmanuel was de facto boycotted by Charlotte's grandmother, who had written to Charles-Emmanuel's mother, Anne-Marie d'Orléans, that Charlotte would be a bad choice for her son. Towards the end of the summer of 1719, a new marriage negotiation was being held. Charlotte was to be married to Francesco III d'Este, son of the Duke of Modena. Charlotte's father was very enthusiastic about the union, as it would bring the Duchy of Modena, which had been an ally of the Holy Roman Empire for quite a while, closer to France again. Furthermore, it would remove his burdensome daughter from the French court. Charlotte, however, was not at all happy about being married abroad and refused to consent to the union. To change his daughter's mind, the regent offered to release the Duc de Richelieu in exchange for her consent. Charlotte then accepted the marriage proposal, and Richelieu was released from prison on August 30, 1719. Upon his release, Richelieu immediately resumed contact with Charlotte. When his letters to her became less and less frequent, and finally ceased, Charlotte finally resigned to the idea of a wedding to Francesco d'Este. A papal dispensation was obtained, and the marriage contract was signed on January 31st, 1720. But Charlotte was in no hurry to travel to her new country. Under the pretext that she was indisposed, she forced her traveling party of over 150 people to make long stops in cities along the way, or to travel for only 3 hours a day. In addition, she made detours as she pleased, virtually crisscrossing the south to delay her arrival at the Modena court as long as possible. When the princess finally arrived at the Modena court, her journey, which under normal circumstances would have taken about a month, had taken 11 weeks. Upon her arrival at the Modena court on June 20, 1720, Charlotte met her husband and her father-in-law Rinaldo d'Este for the first time. Her first impression was a disappointed one. Her husband-to-be, Francesco, was sullen, very reserved, and not particularly handsome. Charlotte found him ugly and short. Nevertheless, she enjoyed the pompous entry into the city, which was followed by several days of festivities. Modena court life had nothing in common with the glamorous life she was used to in Paris, but Charlotte settled herself into her new life as well as she could. She brought glamour and entertainment to court and formed friendly relationships with her 3 sisters-in-law. When she became unwell in mid-August, her doctors first diagnosed her as pregnant, but quickly had to change their diagnosis to smallpox. Charlotte became quite ill and was already being administered the last sacraments in anticipation of death, but unexpectedly she recovered. Meanwhile, Charlotte's father-in-law was impatiently waiting for a male heir to be born to the young couple. But Charlotte avoided sharing the bed with her husband in the hope that the marriage would be annulled and she would be able to return to France. Finally, on November 18, 1723, the long-awaited first child was born, a son who was baptized Alfonso. In 1724, a second boy, Francesco, followed. Unfortunately, both children died in June of 1725. The death of the children brought the couple closer together, and in October 1726, Maria Teresa Felicitas, the couple's first daughter, was born. In total, the union between Francesco and Charlotte produced 10 children, of whom 6 reached adulthood. Those 6 are Maria Teresa Felicitas d'Este, Ercole III d'Este, Duke of Modena, Matilde d'Este, Maria Fortunata d'Este, Benedetto Filippo d'Este, and finally Maria Elisabetta Ernestina d'Este. At the end of 1733, the Duchy of Modena became occupied by foreign troops when the War of the Polish Succession erupted. Charlotte's father-in-law fled to Bologna. Despite declarations of neutrality by the ducal family, towards the end of the summer of 1734, rumors circulated that the Duke had given his support to the imperial side. The Duke therefore asked his daughter-in-law to intercede for him at the French royal court. Charlotte was only too happy to comply with his request, as it gave her a valid reason to finally return to France. Meanwhile, in France, her mother and brother Louis successfully prevented Charlotte's return to France. Upon order of King Louis XV, Charlotte was forbidden to travel any further than Lyon. There, she had to wait for more than 4 months for further instructions before she was conditionally granted permission to travel on to Paris. After an absence of more than 15 years, she returned to the French capital on March 12, 1735. Her husband Francesco followed her to France, and Charlotte gave birth to her son Benedetto there in September of 1736. Upon the death of her father-in-law in October 1737, her husband became the new Duke of Modena and he returned to his homeland while Charlotte remained in France. She didn't return to Modena until June 1739, when she transformed the court there into one of the most extravagant in Europe. Charlotte's carefree court life came to an abrupt end when the War of the Austrian Succession erupted. Because Francesco III did not want to choose either of the two rival sides, troops of the King of Sardinia, Charles-Emmanuel, marched into the duchy in June 1742. The ducal couple retreated to Venice, where Charles-Emmanuel had guaranteed them a life in peace. Charlotte's husband eventually decided to support Spain, and his wife was subsequently allowed to travel to Paris one more time, despite renewed opposition from her brother. Through the intervention of her ex-lover Richelieu, however, the Duchess by now had made a new friend at the French royal court, Marie-Anne de Mailly-Neslay, the Duchess of Châteauroux and maîtresse en titre to Louis XV, who provided Charlotte with a secure position at Versailles. Charlotte even managed to marry 2 of her daughters into the French high nobility. Her eldest daughter married Louis Jean-Marie de Bourbon, Duke of Penthièvre, who was a grandson of Louis XIV, and Maria Fortunata became Princess of Conti by marrying her cousin Louis François II de Bourbon. After the end of the War of the Austrian Succession, Francesco repeatedly urged his wife to return to him in Modena, but Charlotte repeatedly postponed her return because she no longer wanted to give up the glamorous and comfortable life in Versailles. When she finally returned to Modena in 1759, her husband, who no longer believed he would ever see his wife again, had become romantically involved with the widowed Marchesa Simonetti, Teresa di Castelbarco. Consequently, Charlotte left Modena again after 2 months and then returned to France, where she spent the remainder of her life before she died on January 19, 1761. Charlotte was buried in Paris, but her heart was taken to Reggio and buried in the Church of the Salesian Sisters there. As always, thank you for watching.